Hey guys, thanks for joining in. Scott from Realistic Outdoors. Just a quick intro on this one. We're getting so close. The sides are going up. Everything's happening fast. This 30-minute one, so much happens that I compressed it all in there. Lots of details still, but you can fast forward through if you want. It's a lot of fast forwarding. There's a lot of pro tips inside, so stay tuned. This is really getting exciting. I just love how close we're getting. We'll see you guys inside. Trying to keep this video within the time constraints. What I'm doing here is I just took a 4x8 sheet of 1/2-inch plywood and I'm just measuring the inside frame of my sled, and I want to make sure that I can get this cut perfectly once the first time. So I'm going to just measure about 16 times. My dyslexic self likes to read numbers backwards, so I want to make sure that this is absolutely perfect. Then I'll get up my Craig track saw dealie, and if you don't have one of these, by the way, they are definitely a life changer. You don't have to pull out your table saw very often, which makes a huge difference. Perfect cuts every time. Okay, I got the board in. I got 2 bolts. I got them as low as I can, but I'm gonna have to countersink them into the wood a tiny bit, so I'm just gonna jump on it. Also testing. I think it's solid. I'm just gonna use a Forstner bit just to go in a tiny bit, just to hide these bolt heads. I mean, it's not a big deal, but might as well make it as flat as possible. The other bolt conveniently landed right on a knot, so it didn't make a mark. So I'm gonna have to measure it over and hope that I'm close, and hope that I can actually drill that knot. Good times. Now water. Whew, much better. Now, I've been trying to get this done. It's what's the date today? March 10th. Spring break's coming up. I wanted to have the rolling frame or the sliding frame done by now, so that I can I have 10 days off spring break. I wanted to finish this up and actually test it before I launch the series this summer. And the series will carry on and be ready for around winter. So if you're building along, it'll be ready for you for winter. But this wacky weather we're having, it's 8 degrees or 9 degrees out there and windy. And when I came in, there was ice. And when I went out, I had to put a drawbridge across to get across the water. There might not be any snow. I might have to drive way north. We'll see. Fingers crossed, but maybe I'm gonna slow down and just finish when it's finished. That's a bummer. Just 180 grit. Give it a quick sand before I paint the Flex Seal. I haven't decided if I'm going to do both sides or not. So I only bought a small one because the inside will be inside. So I'm just doing the bottom right now. Waterproof it. Flex Seal. Well, it's time to start on the cabin. I got the floor up here just so I can get at it easily. I have my first sheet of birch plywood over there. I'm going to start tracing out the shape and go from there. Pretty excited. Okay, I don't have the exact measurements out here right now, but I do have them in the plans that I'll leave with you guys. But everybody's plans are going to be a little bit different. I just kind of sketched out a shape that I liked on a piece of paper, and you can see me referring to it here quite often on my phone. I just want to make sure it is what I want, and at least it close. And then for the radiuses here, what I've done was I just drew a square from where I wanted the radius to start and where I wanted it to end. And then from the corner, I drew an intersecting line that went past right through there. And then all I did was I just got a pencil with a piece of string on it. And then I started it at the beginning where I wanted the radius to go. And then I held it at the end of that line I drew. And then I just used a good old string to give me a nice even curled radius. Pretty easy. And then I knew where I wanted the curve to start to give me enough headroom and then start sloping down the back. So I measured from the far end of the radius, and then I measured till I got to the other end and started the same process for the back corner. Just a really good tip here while I'm measuring out where all my doors and windows are going to go. Before you make any cuts to the wood, use your square edges of the plywood to make the most square marks you can. Once you start cutting into it and you have radiuses and slopes, it's really hard to become square again. So take advantage of the fact everything is square on the outside right now before you start. Use like a T-square like I use here. That way your measurements will start every time and be perfect every time. Tip number 2. I used a spray paint can lid here just to make my corners on my door nice perfect radiuses. However, you will find out near the end why this wasn't a good idea for me, and it may not be a good idea for you, but just keep this in mind. I can never stress enough how important it is to take a few minutes to put a square on your blade of your jigsaw and make sure it's cutting straight. Save you some troubles. Once I cleaned up the edges of the first side, I made sure to clamp it perfectly on the new board so that it wouldn't move, and then I traced it out, cut the exact same shape. And this is the best time to make sure that everything is exact the way you want it. Just a full repeat of the process that we just finished, using my Kreg and my jigsaw. Once I was finished that, I clamped them together, made sure the bottoms were square and the corners were tight and perfect. And then I'm just gonna sand and make sure both of these pieces are exactly the same and nicely sanded. I've only just started using this multi-tool and I cannot believe how I've lived without it. This thing is fabulous. I've cut so many things that I couldn't have cut with anything else. And then I got this door cut out, and now we had a really good start on this camper. Good morning, back in the shop again this morning. A little contemplation here. I got to stand the walls up, but I need to compensate for the thickness of the siding that I'm using, which is this aluminum plastic composite. And that's what I'm going to be using for the outside sheeting. The wood standoff that I'll be screwing to the wall itself to help actually have something to screw into when I screw in from the floor, and the thickness of the insulation. So I'm going to be contemplating that for the next few minutes, figure out how much space offset I need to build the wall to compensate for all of those things. Let's get started. Okay, so what I've discovered with this humming and hawing is, so I have the 1/2 inch sheet of birch plywood. Then I'm going to have a 1/2 inch strip along the bottom. It'll be a nailing or screwing bit to give it something extra to bite into. So that's 1/2 inch proud of the actual sheet itself. Now this insulation is 1 inch and the actual siding is just a 1/16. So I'm out basically 3/4/16, something like that. So there's going to be too much insulation. So now I got to figure out how I'm going to compensate for the difference in that, you know, a little bit less. Some more humming and hawing to do. Okay, what I decided was to solve my problem, because I'm using thicker insulation because this is a winter camper, this is for ice fishing, there's a little more insulation, a little thicker. I'm going to put 2 strips of 1/2 inch plywood, 2.5 inches thick along the base on both sides of that and on this side of the wall. It'll even give me more space to screw to. Then it'll give me the proper standoff for the 1 inch insulation, and then my sheeting. So should be awesome. Let's get started. One thing I've noticed over time is taking a measurement. I'm not a woodworker by trade, so you're like, oh, 1/2 inch sheet of this and 1/2 inch sheet of that. I'll allow for 1 inch, and that's where you'd be wrong, because all this lumber is the measurement before it's sanded, before it's, you know, trimmed. Like a 2x4 is not a 2x4. It's like an 1 inch and 7/8 by whatever. So whenever I do a wood project like this here, I have my 3 sheets clamped together. My actual wall, the 2 pieces of furring strips I'll be putting along the bottom, and the outdoor siding. Now I'm going to use my calipers, get an actual measurement, and that's the measurement I will work with. Always line up your wood and double check, because it's not the measurements, it says it is. Trust me. Pro tip. Get out the calipers. Actually, I think I'll use my inside calipers. Changed my mind. Using these ones. With the 3 pieces of plywood and my siding, I'm just slightly less than 1.5 inches. So if I'd used 1 1/16 inch, I would have been dealing with a gap. So anyway, now I got my measurement. Set that up in my square, and then I will draw myself some lines. Once I put the calipers onto my square and got that exact measurement, I just drew 2 lines down the sides, the full length of both sides. Now that's where my wall will start. So everything else will sit on the outside. So now I want to set up the table saw for 2.5 inches so I can cut some strips to glue into the base of it. Definitely take the time to make sure your fence is square at both ends. Unless you've got like $1 million saw, it's never the same, and you'll get pinched off or you'll have trapezoidal pieces. So get a standard square, measure it to the saw blade, to the fence, and then use your actual guide to follow that along and make sure it's square. And then you won't get kickbacks, it's not as dangerous, and you get way better pieces. I bought that saw off Marketplace about 1.5 months ago. I saw it on there. It was $100. Look at the size of the motor. The thing works like a charm. It took me about 40 minutes to tweak the blade and the motors and stuff to get it but it cuts nice. So you can get cheap saws if you keep your eyes open. And I'll just cut pieces to length to get them to fit in there. On this particular side, I believe I used a couple scrap pieces, but I'm just going to run a whole bunch of glue along the side on the outside of that line, and then I'm going to glue these boards and clamp them onto this piece. Let's go. Word of caution, when you're working on 2 separate sides, think about it 2 or 3 times what side you're putting stuff on, because if you make 2 matching sets, then they won't work. And don't ask me how I know that. Okay, one of the next obstacles I face is I got a really good deal on these 2 windows, but they're for 2-inch walls, and now mine are 1 3/4 inches. So I have to play with some pieces here, and I see that 2 inches fits it perfectly, but I've only got 3 pieces of plywood, including my insulation. So I am going to have to build myself a wooden bezel, which I built out of cedar, and you'll see in the future it turned out so awesome. I'm actually glad I had this bit of an issue, because it ended up way nicer than it would have. I really took the time here to find a position for the window. I kind of tried to follow my drawings, but drawings are not always as accurate as they are in the real world. So I took my time to have a good look where I wanted it exactly, and then I spent a very long time measuring to make sure I got all these cut lines, because you don't want to make this mistake, cutting the hole too big and having to try and fill it. So I drew the inside of the bezel, the outside of the bezel, and then once I figured out the size I needed, I just found a piece of metal in the shop that I used to kind of trace these corners. And then once I got it all traced out, I was able to use that multi-tool. Oh no, I didn't use the multi-tool, that's too bad. I actually used the drill to start the hole and then cut out my pieces, which fit absolutely perfect and ended up being completely true and square.
Measure 72 times, cut once. I'll come back after lunch, measure it again. Love it. And it's a slider. It has a screen on it. Not a lot of bugs in the winter, but it has a screen on it. I guess I could use it in the summer. Spring break. First thing in the shop. It's gonna be 18 degrees in here today, or not here, outside. Not gonna be snow when this is done. I hope there's some somewhere.
Okay, just clean this mess off after I pull the clamps off, and then I'm going to use these number 8 Robertson 2.5-inch screws. They're deck screws, and I'm going to use that to attach the sides to the floor. So I'm just going to put this just over the line so that I have room to put some glue down. So I'm going to lay a nice bed of glue down, and then I'm going to slide the wall back over top of it, and then I'll put it in place with this board that I'm just hooking up here right now, and then that way it'll be glued and screwed nice and solid. Okay, once I get it lined up in here, I use my countersink, and I think it's a 16th inch bit, maybe a 1/4 inch bit. I can't remember exactly what it is, an 1/8 inch bit. Anyway, it's the one that was recommended for those screws. And I will note that even though I put these in now and get the wall stood up, I actually go back a little later and I can't find the footage for it. I actually put silicone on the screws and then I paint them back over with some black rubber coating to continue the seal, and I don't know what happened to that, and I apologize for that video being missing. In some places the sides started to bow out a little bit, and to square that off I put a small screw into the floor, and then I used my hammer in such a way like this so that you could square it up, so you can see it squared it up, and then I would add the screw to it once it was flush. Just a little trip. Nope, it's not a trip at all, it's a little tip. How about that? Okay, now that we've finished up getting the wall set up, I have to cut some strips that are 2.5 inches wide, and I'm going to use them for cross bracing for the roof of the camper. And they ended up being 35 inches. They were going to be 36, but I had to take off 1/2 inch on each side to add the extra furring strip for the bottom of the wall. No big deal. And so now on my square I set 1 inch so that I can draw some marks. The insulation that's going on the roof will be 1 inch, and I want it to be flush with the top when it's finished, so I make a mark. Now I use my flexible tape and go up each side and mark exact spots on both sides, and then that's where I will start, and I'll put a center point for the cross bracing. At first I was just trying to freehand this, get the pilot hole drilled, and just get one started, but quickly I realized I actually had a clamp that it didn't fit 36 inches, but it definitely fit 35 inches, so lucky for me this was 1 inch smaller than it should have been. So quickly I realized, hey, I need 3 hands. No big deal. Cue the light bulb. Where's that clamp? Ta-da! That's using your noggin. Okay, my standard procedure for setting all these braces in place was to get them in place, pre-drill them so that I didn't split the wood, countersink them, put screws in them. Once they were in place, I would take the screws out, put glue in, as I'm doing here, replace the wood, and put in the nice long screws. It seemed to work pretty well. I had to use the clamp in quite a few places, but hey, it worked pretty good. Well, I get an idea how big it is now. It's well, I guess it's 5'10" to here, 7 foot long. It doesn't look that big here, but it's actually got some pretty good space. The goal was to have one at the start and finish of the camper, and then one about every 2 feet. Unless there was a corner, then I would have one at the beginning of the corner and one at the end of the corner, and that would just make the wood receive better when I try and bend it on there. I made some amazing progress on the weekend. I got the walls up and the supports in. I was just checking out some styrofoam. Apparently I don't have enough sheets. This week I'm going to start building the raised platform for the bed with the storage in it, which is going to be useful, super useful, and it'll also allow me to raise and lower the back as a bit of a sit-up reclining position. So I'm pretty stoked at where this is going. It's going to go fast. I got some time off coming up next week, so I should be able to get this completed up, or very close to it. I'm going to run all the electrical this week after work. I'm going to run as much electrical as I can. But I'm very stoked about this Cutter Creek outdoor project. Special thanks to Cutter Creek Outdoors for sponsoring this series and this camper build. And if you haven't already, you should go down and check out some of the toys they have. It's a pretty amazing place. We'll get this done up and we'll get some ice fishing done. Probably not this season, but maybe. It's going to be close. All right, talk to you then. Thanks very much, you guys. Take care. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for hanging in, and stay tuned for some next stuff. It's coming really fast now, so be prepared to get this thing all together. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Scott from Realistic Outdoors.